Hello and welcome to the High Maintenance Hippie podcast. This is your host, Ashley from Ashley Taylor Wellness. On this podcast, we talk about all things beauty, health, wellness, and optimization. Being a high maintenance hippie represents not being boxed in, as I strongly believe that one size does not fit all. I'm a nurse turned coach, and I have learned so much about both conventional and alternative options, and I want to help you expand your options. I'm here to inspire you to learn new ways to improve your quality of life and to take your power back. I'm so excited that you're here, so let's get started. Hello, and welcome back to the High Maintenance Hippie podcast. This is Ashley, and today our guest is Tyler Ippoliti.
Got it.
Close enough. And he is such an amazing person. I have been on his podcast, Journey Doses, with, is it your wife or fiance? Fiance, Ashley. She's amazing. So the podcast is on pause right now, but definitely recommend checking it out. There were some really great episodes, especially about some of the things in your relationship. It triggered me. I learned a lot. And I think our triggers help us grow, but you're so grounded and secure in yourself. So I really love the two of you, even though I live a different lifestyle. Tyler is a personal trainer and a health coach, and he's here to talk about a really powerful event that happened in his life recently and to share a lot of lessons and perspectives that I think will be really valuable. So thank you so much for being here, Tyler. I'm really happy to see your face.
Thank you. Yeah, it's always a pleasure to dance with you, and I'm excited to be able to share whatever I can share.
Yeah. Okay. So we did our podcast in 2021 together. It was your podcast with Ashley. And what did we first bond over? I think medical freedom. That was something that's important to both of us. Do you remember what we connected on back then?
Yeah, I mean, I just, found you through the gram somehow, and seeing how righteously you shared your message and unabashedly shared regularly what the message was and not being afraid of that and being vulnerable in your own experiences. I always really connect with anybody who's really being authentically themselves through their hardships. And I mean, I don't know if I think I reached out to you, messaged you and said like, I'd love to have you on our podcast. And I was actually really surprised. Like you had started to have quite a following and you were nice enough to hop on the podcast with us. And we talked all about your experience of being in the medical field and being a nurse. And then, I don't know what else we got into, but some fun stuff.
Yeah. And one of the things that I'm really big on is respect for others. We are not going to live the same lifestyle. We're not going to agree on everything. There have been things that you've said that have triggered me, and I still love you as a person. I can disagree or say that's not what would work for me, but I fully respect that that works for him. And I think that's one of the things that I get from you and Ashley. You're just very open-minded, very loving, and probably more loving. Maybe some of those things trigger me because I still have some walls up with love. So you've really mirrored a lot of things back for me to take a look at. So I'm very grateful for all that you've shared.
I'm curious, is there anything in particular that comes to mind for you right now that's triggered you?
Yes. Okay. So I'm very loud and proud about how vanilla I am and how monogamous I am, but I've always been curious about how different people live their lives. And there was a podcast that you and Ashley recorded after our podcast that was about the journey of opening the relationship and what that was like. And I feel like there were even some moments on there where you remembered little things differently, but it was so real and raw. And I'm like, wow, any couple that has the ability to have like this raw and transparent of a conversation, like I'm very inspired by that. And I think it obviously brought you closer together. People say that's a death sentence for a relationship. Well, now you two are engaged, and the love and the loyalty. I mean, if the last month or two, however long it's been, hasn't shown you what an amazing partnership you have, I hope that it challenges people to look at, just because you two have a different relationship dynamic, the love is there, and you two are just such an amazing couple.
Thanks. Yeah, I mean, You're right in that, like, we've put ourselves through the ringer in our lifestyle the last 3 years, living in an RV together and also opening up our relationship while we started to travel together. If we can get through, and not to mention all the, what I've just been through and, other important things in our lives that were really hard, I know that our relationship can get through anything that we want it to now. And when we show up on the podcast, we show up exactly how we are here in the RV every day. Like,
yes.
so ourselves together too, and I really credit Ashley a lot in how she would describe herself as very blunt, which means to me that she's just very forthcoming. Like she's just going to be who she is, and
Hmm.
it's going to trigger people. And I'm a little bit, more of a people pleaser, but I still trigger people with the things I do and that I believe. I'm just a little bit more gentle about it. So, yeah, when we come
Hmm.
together, we are going to trigger people, and we continue to do that. But I love being curious about why those triggers come up with people and having the conversations
Hmm.
like you and I do, and that other people
Hmm.
are willing to do. That's what alchemizes connection. Like if you can see my point of view but not live it, wonderful, and same vice versa.
Yeah. Well, it's brought up a lot for me, so I'm very thankful. And I just feel like the way that you all, anybody that shares a message, which is this is what's right for me, I'm fully going to support that adult in whatever decision that is. And I think people are so quick to say, well, if I wouldn't do it, then it's wrong. But I'm just not like that. I think there's so many ways to be happy, so many ways to love. And everyone's got to be on the same page. You know, you can't have one person that wants an open relationship if the other doesn't.
Yeah, of course.
Have you read the book The Truth by Neil Strauss or heard of that book?
Yeah, I listened to it a while back. Yep.
Okay. I did too.
Yeah, wonderful. What was the first book, Vice? And
The
the
game.
game, yeah. So that I didn't read or listen to that, but I know that the sequence of it was this full circle of him finding out what is really important to him.
Yeah. And I think one of the, this isn't really the main point of this podcast, but just one thing I wanted to say about it is a lot of people think that, oh, it's so easy. But I think if you want to grow and you want to find things to heal, I mean, that's a very vulnerable position to put yourself in. And I remember hearing Ashley even talk about, I don't remember which one, but it was like not asking for permission, but saying, hey, this is what I'm going to do ahead of time, and just navigating
Mm.
all of these different pieces. It requires a tremendous amount of maturity, communication, being grounded in your emotions. I mean, really takes a lot. So,
Ashley is really good and enjoys hypothetical situations. Let's talk about the possibilities.
mhm.
And I'm more of like, let's go through the possibilities and see what happens and kind of grow from there.
Mhm.
And there's a happy medium there. Like you can hypothesize future events endlessly, right? And you just don't know what you don't know that could happen. So there's a preparing the mind for what could happen. And this could be applied to everything that we're going to talk about today, but
Mhm.
it allows people to kind of connect and see like what's okay in the future, what's not. But even so, like I've made mistakes, she's made mistakes, and
Mhm.
the important thing is that we are willing to stick with each other through those things and understand that we're just fucking humans. Like we're going to make
Yeah.
mistakes, and we're willing to grow with each other through that. But in regards to diving into that in general, my philosophy in growing has always been dive in. Like I went to ayahuasca before I did any other psychedelic. I just have this impulsive quest to dive into the deep end, and that's kind of
Mhm.
how we did it with open. We were like open, and then in a full-on poly like situation. So
Mhm.
when you put yourself into a situation that you have no choice but to adapt, you will adapt. Your mind will really change. Your patterns will really change if you're immersed in that. I think a lot of the self-development world is great, but if you're not really immersed in what you're trying to grow through or adapt with, it's just not really going to happen because there's distractions and old patterns. It's just really hard to grow through.
Yeah. Well, the situation that I want to talk about today, I don't know if you really had a choice in that matter. So I'll let you tell the story, but you were recently involved in an accident that I think changed your life forever. And, from what I've seen. So what can you share with us? I want to be respectful of like the details in your privacy, but what exactly happened that led you into this crisis situation?
It's funny. There's actually a little segue there. So Ashley and I have been on the road for 2 years, living out of our RV and
Mhm.
moving every 3 weeks across the country or so, something like that. And we're in North Carolina now, and we actually met a couple through Field in Asheville. And this is actually a couple that we matched with when we were back in California. So it was this kind of synchronistic, like, oh, I remember seeing you on Field there. We never met, and now I see you on Field in Asheville. Let's connect. So we connect with this couple. just vanilla stuff, just meeting and making friends. And they knew that we were continuing to travel to Charlotte more eastward, so they connected us with this other couple that was in this lifestyle as well, in a E&M poly kind of open lifestyle. So we get to Charlotte, and we're here for just 5 days. And this other couple invites us to their home for a little barbecue. Very vanilla, not an orgy. And there were other couples there, friends there, just people that they knew, just regular life stuff. And there was probably 12 people at their house. And it was a wonderful evening. We were all drinking, eating, having a blast, playing Pictionary. It was a good time. And the gentleman who owned the house, he had this little fire pit. And I don't know if I've shown you the picture, Ashley, but it is literally, when I describe this to people, it's inconceivable the damage that it did. It's probably a 16-inch in diameter cement bowl. And in the cement bowl, there's a metal dog bowl. In the metal dog bowl, there's lava rocks just kind of for decoration. So it just looks like this little bowl, like there's like food in it. It's very small. And in the metal dog bowl, there's isopropyl alcohol laying in the bottom. And the idea is you just light the alcohol and it'll just stay slow burning for some time. So the evening is proceeding and he has this little fire pit running. The fire was actually going for quite a while. No issues. And then the fire went out somehow, and I was unaware of this. Everybody was unaware of it. And we're all sitting in this little outdoor backyard area, and the fire pit place thing, whatever we want to call it, is actually sitting on a table in the middle of all these, outdoor seating chairs. And we're all conversing, and the gentleman went to go relight the isopropyl alcohol, at which time the vapor that had been emitting from the heat of it before combusted into probably a 6-foot fireball, like huge fireball. I think at least 6 people caught fire. He did, his wife did, 4 other people, including myself. His dog caught fire.
Wow.
So at least half of the people that were there all caught fire and were burned to some extent. I know that one other young woman was also hospitalized for 2 or 3 days. Just so happens I took the worst of it. I caught fire to my chest, neck, arms, thighs, face. I was probably on fire for 20 seconds. I remember the combustion of the fire was very surprising. It was almost like I laughed. I immediately laughed, like, oh shit, big flame. But then I realized I was on fire. And then I kind of ran with my eyes closed through his yard, and I'm just running around screaming and waiting for myself to be not on fire anymore. And I think he or somebody else helped me take my shirt off, which was the primary thing of being, like, that was on fire, my shorts and hair and stuff. And that didn't completely take out the fire. So that's all happening, and I'm still running around saying eventually, like, what do I do? What do I do? And somebody said, roll, drop and roll.
Right.
Which apparently seems so obvious to everybody when you reflect on that lesson as a kid. I don't know where or when you learned that, but that definitely didn't come to mind when I was on fire. So I remember after being told that, I did roll on the ground, and I remember like opening my eyes to see myself rolling on the ground, seeing my hands and arms like still on fire. And eventually like just kind of patting everything out. And then, I lay there in his yard, and big shock to the entire group. Ashley didn't even know. And when I refer to Ashley, viewers, listeners, my partner, Ashley.
Yes.
Yeah. I'll call her Ash.
Yeah.
Ash chased the dog that was on fire and had no idea what happened to me. And then eventually the owner of the house, who ironically is a fire chief in Charlotte, comes over to me and realizes that I'm burnt, and 911 is called. Paramedics get there to me, and there's a lot of little funny instances of, being treated by the whole medical system, so we could talk about that. But yeah, they take me in an ambulance to a trauma center, and then Ashley was not able to ride with me in the ambulance, but she met me at the trauma center, and then I was there in the ER, and eventually I was medevaced to a burn unit in Winston-Salem, which was about a 20-minute helicopter ride from there. And then, yeah, I was in the hospital for 24 days after that. And this was all
Wow.
this took place 2 months ago. So it's not been that long.
Yes. I mean, you're still probably healing
Oh, yeah,
physically, emotionally, all the ways.
definitely.
Okay. So 24 days in the hospital. Let me ask you, have you ever been a patient in the hospital prior to this?
Never been admitted to a hospital. Actually, let me reverse that. I have had an orthopedic surgery. So I've had 2 hip surgeries when I was 25. So I've been put under anesthesia for things like that.
Okay. Did you have to be under anesthesia? I suppose so, because you ended up having quite a few surgeries.
I was put out, I don't know, probably at least 5 times.
Okay. So you didn't look at your face right away,
No. Yeah.
and you're glad that you didn't. Can you speak about that for us?
Sure. Yeah. Well, my eyes were actually burned. So in taking the ambulance ride and the helicopter, you'd be surprised that the most uncomfortable thing for me was actually opening my eyes. Like, I was definitely uncomfortable in the rest of my body, having been burned. But opening my eyes it felt like there was sand in my eyes, so I couldn't open my eyes. Because my retinas were burned, I didn't open my eyes for the first 3 days of being in the hospital. And, which means I didn't see a lot of what was going on my body. And thankfully so, because I think if I would have seen my face or seen the bubbling and all of like the craziness of what was happening on my body, I probably would have freaked out a little bit more than I already did. I remember that I was going to FaceTime my mom, and my partner, Ashley, she said that
Hmm.
probably isn't a good idea right now because of how my face looked. And I know that was the right choice because my mom would have had an even harder time than she already did. Yeah, and I only saw the photos of my face. I actually didn't see the photos of my face from the first few days until after I had already left the hospital. Yeah.
For some people, they might want to see it, but in your mind, if you had seen how bad it was, do you think that that would have changed your beliefs about what was possible for healing? Or what do you think might have changed if you knew that information or saw that?
Yeah, I mean, I think in reflecting on even the image now, seeing that and having seen it back then, I would have questioned that my face would look like this right now. Like if you're watching this on YouTube,
Yeah.
you wouldn't necessarily say, "Oh my God, like this guy's face was burned," even to the degree that it was. If you see the photos, you'd be surprised that I had that photo to this transformation now. So yeah, I would have had a hard time believing that the moneymaker here would be as good as it is now.
Yes.
And there's definitely some vanity in that. I identify with being an attractive person.
Hmm.
My ego enjoys what I believe to be an attractive person, and one of the first things I asked was like, "How bad is it?"
Hmm.
Because I wanted to know if I was going to be deformed. I wanted to know if I still had a nose and ears and shit like that. Not so many people are that lucky.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up. And that's maybe not the most easy thing to admit, but I'm the same way. I mean, I believe if you look good, you feel good, you do the best with what you've got. But
Totally.
I think that you're a very attractive man and you're very comfortable with your body. And, I don't mean that to be disrespectful to your partnership. And I think we agree you can find a person attractive and not be disrespectful in any way. But
Totally.
some people that might be triggering. But, I would feel the same way. I would ask the same question, like, what am I going to look like? I mean, yes, living is important and our quality of life. We take these things for granted. I'm someone that in the past would nitpick little things and wow, so grateful for what I have, instead of seeing everything that we're not, maybe in some cases. And I don't feel that it came from a place of insecurity for you. I think it truly came from appreciation. Like I work hard for my body, I take care of myself, I love
Oh, yeah.
myself. And what do you think about vanity? I know it gets a bad rap, but what do you think about that?
I don't even like the word vanity because there is a
Okay.
negative association with it. Beauty certainly emits from different areas of self, right? I know that with let's say an atypically, like a not so stereotypically attractive external body or face can
Hmm.
certainly be made more attractive with confidence that comes with that, right? So, I mean, beauty is certainly interpreted in many different ways. When it comes to assessing that for yourself, like, do I know myself to be beautiful or do I feel myself to be beautiful? I don't think there's anything more important because it's your relationship to self.
Mm-hmm.
So call it vanity or call it whatever you want. I call it relationship to myself. If I believe myself to be attractive or I just like how I look, I like how I feel, then that's amazing. That's giftedness for yourself. And if it is exercise, if it is a skincare routine, if it's hair extensions, like I don't care what it is. If you feel good doing that, that's all that matters.
Mm-hmm.
And all the chitter chatter that happens outside of you is bullshit. And everybody can suck it.
I happen to agree. But let's just say that, I mean, I really do. I think that a lot of the patients that I talked to when I was a hospital nurse, they would say, I'm 60 years old, but I feel, well, maybe not in that moment because they're so sick, but they would feel a lot younger. They just say their outsides don't match their insides. And I'm all about decorating your shell, but I agree that a person's soul and personality is going to make or break it because you can have a great looking meat suit, the outer shell,
Oh yeah.
and that doesn't necessarily mean that you're an attractive person because I think it comes from the eyes, the soul, like who we're being. So it's really just the cherry on top, but it's okay to want that too, I think.
Absolutely. And I think it's a really interesting thing to address that the change throughout life too. Like I'm addressing how my body has changed now.
Mm-hmm.
Luckily my face is good enough as it is after having been through the experience, but my chest is never going to be the same. Right. And, any guy who's into working out knows that pecs are, something that we take pride in. Right. I've taken many a selfie of what I believe to be nice pecs, and now they're going to have burned skin. So this comes with aging too. Like if you can grow with your changing relationship to self throughout the entirety of your life, you will be a powerful person.
Mm-hmm.
And that means accepting the beauty of what is right now and not comparing to what was or what will be. It's just now. I respect this right now because it's mine.
Beautifully said. Yes. So, was there a time in your life, in this experience, I should say, where you had to question not will you love yourself, but will you feel differently about yourself? Let's say your face was unrecognizable. I mean, how do you think that you would have felt? Do you think that unconditional love for self, you would have been able to get to that point? Do you think you would have struggled with it? Like, what's your honest answer on that?
Oh, I'm sure the process would be a much longer process than what I'm experiencing right now. Maybe indefinite, like
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure that the relationship with myself would have changed over time. But I mean, the face, especially, like I'm such a visual person. When it comes to my face, I don't know if I would ever fully integrate that, to be honest with you.
Okay.
That's as far as image goes. What I was actually more thankful for as a
Mm-hmm.
man was that my groin region wasn't burned. I
Yes.
had these khaki shorts on and they saved that area of my body. If I was damaged there and my functionality of manhood was taken from me, that would have been way worse than having my face
Mm-hmm.
burned. My identity is very much tied to this face, but I'd say it's even more tied to what I believe to be my manhood.
Mm-hmm.
And that region is a part of that. It's not all of that. It is part of it.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm ultimately grateful that those khaki shorts saved some of my manhood.
Absolutely. Yeah. So the timing, and there's never a great time to go through something like this. But like you shared, you had been traveling for years in an RV on the road together and finally nested in your own place. And this happens. 24 days is a really long time to be in the hospital. And I believe one of the reasons we connected in 2021 was because of a lot of the differing opinions about 2020. And I was very vocal about, hey, whatever you want to do, even if I wouldn't do it, that's your choice to make. And I stand by that. I also didn't feel people shouldn't be forced to stay home and not be able to work and provide for their families if the pros outweigh the cons for them. And as a nurse in the hospital for so long, I saw how valuable it was to have an advocate, to have someone there for you, especially when you can't advocate for yourself. So I am so grateful that this time, I mean, I wish it never happened, but if it did, that it wasn't in a time where you had to be by yourself. So having Ashley there with you, how did that impact your experience?
First I'll say I don't wish that this didn't happen because I know that this is
Okay.
going to serve me in some way. Secondly, Ash being there with me and witnessing her through all of it. I mean, I was already engaged to her, but the knowing that I have about her is like nail in the coffin easy. Like the commitment, the devotion that she showed to me, the care that she showed for me, it's invaluable to me. Being in the hospital is, it's a new experience to me. You've been there, so you've seen how different people have navigated that. Navigating that for me, luckily I was conscious enough to know what I believe to be healthy choices for me, but there were also times when I was not willing to like deal. So
Hmm.
especially when it came to anything outside of like the financial part, the life part, like she handled all of that. Like she talked to so many different people in the hospital that were like making these big behind the scenes decisions that I was just not ready and willing to do.
Hmm.
So that was huge. And just this is so Ashley too. Like she is such a hard-nosed woman. Like she's not afraid to tell, like she just straight up will tell the person that is dealing with the financial side of things that walks into my room and starts immediately talking to me. She's like, "Whoa, whoa, whoa. Like he's told me he wants you to talk to me. I don't care if he's right there. Talk to me right now." And she's just unafraid to do that. She's unafraid to deal with anything. So I just really admire that, and that's something that I've really learned and gained from her through our relationship is not being such a people pleaser and not being afraid to like really confront what needs to be confronted. And then as far as her willingness to get her hands dirty, like she literally wiped my ass.
Hmm.
And to to do that as a partner is it's you have to step into a different mindset. You have to step into a caretaker mindset, but also realize that the one that you're caretaking for is your romantic and intimate lover.
Hmm.
So she stepped into that role and respected the role, but didn't forget who I was to her.
Hmm.
This is still my romantic partner, my fiance, and I have to do this dirty work right now. So that was an interesting transition afterwards when she didn't have to do that caretaking role anymore and step back into the romantic, intimate partner role. There was a transition. There's a transition in and out.
Hmm.
But it's just interesting because we were both very aware of that as well. When I got out of the hospital, I was like, "Oh, great! Like, let's get close again as much as we could based on my health."
Hmm.
And she's like, and respectfully so, let's pump the brakes a little bit. I need to kind of ease into what I see you as my partner and not as the dude that needs his ass wiped.
Interesting. Okay. But she could be so honest about that she was feeling that way.
Yeah,
And that's the type of relationship you have.
totally.
And that's what I love about you two so much. I mean,
Yeah,
I'm able to do that for my partner probably because I'm a nurse. And I think most couples probably don't use the bathroom in front of each other or have the door open. I don't know. You lived in an RV together. So is that something that you find for your romantic life? It's better to keep separate unless it's an emergent situation? Or are you everybody poops? I mean, what do you think as far as romantic? This could be like something that helps me. Maybe that's the mistake I'm making is that I'm too open with that stuff.
well, there's no mistakes. There's just where you are and where somebody else is not. I would say that if you're hiding any part of self, and that could be like needing privacy in the bathroom from your partner, then that's happening for a reason. I don't know what that reason is for that person, but there's some sort of shame in that or whatever it might be for that particular individual. And I think if you're hiding any part of self from especially your romantic partner, then that's something to look into.
Hmm.
I poop in front of her. I mean, at this point, I have no shame, and I had to let go of that in the hospital. But yeah, I mean, in us living in such an intimate space as an RV, you really have to learn that it really dissolves the boundaries of you believing you're just you. And I think that's an ultimate spiritual perspective on being in a relationship. You have to let go of you just being only you all the time.
Mhm.
I think it's important to have autonomy, but if you are willing to sacrifice and devote your life to, I don't like the word sacrifice for that, but devote your life to somebody else, then the windows are completely open,
Mhm.
at least for me.
Well, that's important to me. Yes, I agree with you on that. It's the most important thing. I would rather hear something, see something that's not ideal or great, but that's what's really happening. So, and also giving my partner privacy. So going back to your time in the hospital. So for the first few days, you couldn't open your eyes. You said it felt like, what did like sandpaper or
Sand was in my eyes. Yeah.
like sand was in your eyes? Okay. So you really couldn't see anything. My understanding is they have to put some type of drop in, or what did they do to actually help the eyes heal and all of the parts of the body?
Yeah, so it was kind of funny is like that first evening being on the helicopter, and then first being admitted to the first emergency room was they gave me these numbing eye drops for my eyeballs, which was the
Hmm.
only thing that gave me relief there. And then come to find out, when the optometrist came in the second emergency room where I was actually going to be staying in Winston Salem, he's like, "Oh, you can't give him too much of that; it can blind him."
Oh,
And I was like, "Shit! Like, what's that dose? Like, I've been taking this every 30 minutes for the last couple hours." So luckily, no damage there long term. And that optometrist ended up just giving me some sort of eye drops.
hmm.
No idea what they were. And then over the course, and that was only, I mean, he might have come in like once a day. I don't know. I the first few days was very blurry to me, but my eyesight came back after 3 days, 3 or 4 days, and it was just through those drops that I took maybe once or twice a day, and that's it. And then from then on, probably 4 days in, my eyesight was absolutely fine, like no issues whatsoever. So the eyes healed really quickly, which that scared me more than anything. I didn't want to be partially blind the rest of my life. And then is healing. You were curious about healing everything from there on.
Yes, but even before we get into that, okay, so when you finally opened your eyes, do you have a memory or a vision of that moment?
Yeah, it was slowly. Like I would just, I remember specifically there was these nurses that were in there treating me and taking care of me for a couple days. It was a nurse being trained who was working with the nurse that was like my primary nurse, and
Hmm.
it was a man and a woman, and I remember like having heard their voices so much, and then I finally opened my eyes to see them. I was like, "Oh my God, you guys are both so pretty." The dude was super attractive. The woman was like beautiful. I was like, "Oh my God, what a sight to see!" Like the first time I opened my eyes, and yeah, and they were surprised, like, "Oh my God, your eyes are open." I was like, "Yeah, I think I'm ready." And but before that, I would kind of open them and test them out.
Hmm.
But I do remember that being like the first moment where I really kept my eyes open.
Yeah. Okay, so I do want to get more into the healing and I'll go back to it just about like taking things for granted. I'll make a note of that for later. But okay,
Mm.
so you had a series of surgeries and procedures, skin grafts and other things. So tell us about that. What was removed and what were the surgeries like? And I also want to know, could you feel anything? Because sometimes with burns, if they're severe enough, you don't have pain, but I don't know. It looked pretty painful. So what was the pain like and what procedures did you have to help everything heal?
Yeah. So the very first procedure was that same evening, and that was probably at like 4 or 5 a.m. that night, the night of the accident, and they call it an excision, which essentially means like scrubbing all of the dead skin off.
Hmm.
So that I was actually not completely out for that, but I was on a heavy dose of fentanyl and maybe morphine at that time. I
Okay.
don't know, or one or the other. But I do remember them saying like, "You got to take something," because I've grown up in a family of opiate abuse, and when they first said like, "All right, you're going to take fentanyl or Dilaudid," I was like, "No, I don't want any of that." And they said, "No, you're taking it." I was like, "You got to pick one." So I ended up picking one. I don't know, but I was just very high and like relaxed in that. And in that first excision, I was completely awake, and I just remember there were 3 or 4 nurses there scrubbing my skin down, and I was just making jokes about who knows what, and they're like, not laughing one bit because it was like more critical than I really understood at the time. So that was the first procedure. The thing with burns is that they kind of change so that they don't really know the severity of them when you're first in there.
Okay.
So my first burn doc, she was the primary burn doc there. She said that 40% of my body was burned with second or third degree, all pretty much on the front side of my body. She came in maybe like 2 days in, 3 days in, saying that 90% of that 40% will need skin grafts, which means that, like, 35% of my body is going to need grafting. And that was shitty because I was like, that's a lot of third, fourth degree burns. Luckily, that didn't end up being true.
Okay.
Through the process of healing over the first week or so, it was still 40% of my body was burned, but the number that was going to need grafting reduced over time. What ended up being grafted, the only thing, well, there was a few things, but my chest, so like the entirety of my chest ended up receiving grafts, like the base of my neck at my throat, the inside of both of my upper arms, and a little bit on my rib cage on my right side.
Okay.
The grafting was taken from my like left thigh, IT band, quad, and glute. Now, the first surgery that happened it was about a week and a half into the hospital, and that was just a deep excision. So that was like they put you out completely, like really out, and they're scrubbing your shit down to like really, really deep, really fresh. And then in that surgery, it's almost like a graft preparation. So it's like they'll use different like organic materials to prepare that skin for attaching to what would be the next graft. And I don't know if that's pig skin or fish skin. It's something weird like that.
Okay.
They actually had that stapled all over my chest, arms, stomach even, and throat. And that was wild. Coming out of that first surgery was horrible. That was probably the most traumatizing of all the experiences in there. I've been under anesthesia before, so I wasn't too worried about it. The post-op room, essentially, like obviously I was really out of it. It felt like I was in a war zone. So when I was coming out of it, it just felt so chaotic. I felt unattended to. I remember just vaguely that my oxygen mask was like off the side of my face, and like really I couldn't move my arms or body, and it was like I was stuck in semi-consciousness but couldn't move and couldn't get help, and it was horrible. It just felt really traumatizing. And then the pain from that surgery was maybe the worst pain that it was just really, really gnarly. Like the deep excision aspect of that surgery made that very painful over my entire body because they were cleaning everything really deeply. And then they took me to my room eventually, and it felt like I was in that post-op forever. And on my way, the dietitian says, like, your feeding tube came out. I got to put it back in, which I don't know if you've ever had that done, but it sucks.
Yeah.
And I was like, I legit was like semi-conscious. I was like, you're really going to do this now? And she's like, well, yeah. And she shoves this thing down my throat, and she's trying to get it into my, I don't know what the little space is below your actual stomach liner is, but they try to shove it layers deep, and they could never do that for me. So she shoves it in my stomach, and she's playing around with that, and that sucked. And then when they took me to my bed, I was still relatively unable to move my body or manipulate it. And it felt like they just fucking tossed me into my bed. Like it felt really rough. And that hurt a ton. And it was at that moment, my mom happened to be in the room. And Ashley was not there, actually. I began to weep, like just full on crying, letting go, all of that emotion with the pain and the overwhelm and what felt like trauma from that post-op. And my mom just held my hand and cried with me, and I just cried and cried. And I said, nobody should have to deal with this. Like, I don't know how anybody can deal with this. I feel like I'm a pretty strong person, and that was my limit. That was really hard. And so that was probably halfway through maybe not quite halfway through the hospital stay. And then all of that heals and preps the graft areas, and then another 7 days go by, and the final surgery, which is the final grafting surgery, takes place, and that's when they took the skin from my thigh and placed it permanently on my chest and in all the other areas. The pain on my leg and glute where they took the skin was the most acute pain that I felt the whole time.
Okay.
The surgeries were far more painful than any of the burns initially.
Interesting.
Because like you said, when you have a 3rd or 4th degree burn, the nerve endings are burned. Mm-hmm. So they weren't nearly as painful as everything else. And that surgery was a little bit easier because it was a more local pain on just that left leg. Very, very painful. But I had nearly no pain in my chest, neck, and all the grafted areas. That, at that point, was easy. It was all like stapled on or whatever. But yeah, they did staple it on. But yeah, the leg was far more painful. And like when I would try to, after that, standing and walking was really rough because of that leg. And even after the hospital, that leg was pretty painful. In between those things, there were like minor procedures where they would clean me and put me out under general anesthesia. So they did that twice. So I said that there were multiple times I went under and not having surgery. And those were the procedures.
Okay. So when I was in nursing school, I did a clinical rotation in a burn unit, but I never worked there. So that was many, many years ago. And explain to someone why you would have a feeding tube for burns, because they may not understand, oh, you burned your skin. Why wouldn't you be able to feed yourself? And it's so much more than a burn to the skin because, yeah, explain why that is.
Yeah, I mean, it's not like I wasn't able to feed myself. Like there was definitely real food going into my body. The skin is such a large organ, right? Like it requires, not to mention hydration, but so much nutrition. The keratin and protein that makes up of your skin it constantly needs to be maintained. And you know this to be true. Like if anybody has dietetic issues or gut problems, where does it almost always show up first? It's your skin, right? Skin problems are huge. And this can go for many different types of recovery, but you need adequate nutrition to heal your body, period. And that was a huge thing that my community supported me with, because I'd never been hospitalized. I didn't know I would ever need a feeding tube. And the stuff that they put generally in the hospital, what they use for feeding tube nutrition is fucking garbage. Like it is really, really bad. I talked to one of my friends. She's a clinical dietitian, and she's like, no, you're not doing that. And she recommended this company called Kate Farms to me that they use, or that she uses for her hospitalized patients. And yeah, so we had to like special order that, and all the dietitians and the nurses were like, what are you doing? Like you're ordering your own food, like your own stuff. Are you sure you want to do this? And it was really like, they were really judgmental of that. And I was like, yeah, I'm for sure getting this. So I actually had them hold off on the feeding tube for like a day or two before I can get any of that. Luckily, they did have some actually in a different, I think it was in the oncology unit. They happened to have a little bit. So I actually used some of that before I ordered my own. A big part of my healing was because I adequately hydrated and ate good food and had that Kate Farms.
Kate, like Kate Farms? Mm-hmm. Okay. I'm asked all the time about substitutes for tube feeds, and all that I've seen in the hospital is not very good. If you read the ingredients, it's corn syrup and just so much low quality nutrition, if you even want to call it that. I mean, it's calories, but I don't know how the quality is. So did they give you a hard time? I mean, it sounds like you said some people were judgmental. It's very much like, why are you being difficult? I would never make a patient feel that way. I would say, what's going to be right for you? Obviously, I would want the same thing. But was that a process to be able to get that for you? Did Ashley have to do a lot of advocating? Was it pretty simple? What was that?
Oh, she was definitely like, we're not using your stuff. We're getting our own stuff. And she was like really like talking to representatives, because it's not like just a normal protein you could go buy at a store. Like you have to talk to a rep for it, because it's usually a clinical use type of protein. So yeah, she was really pushing for one of the nurses there to go get it out of the oncology unit. And then my other friend, the clinical dietitian, she was actually calling her rep, who actually lives in Houston, to call a rep in North Carolina to send me some. So that legwork via the obviously Ashley and then my friends was huge, and
Yes.
I can't believe it even got there that quickly. And even until then, like the food in the hospital, like I really did my best to keep that always gluten free,
Hmm.
and relatively simple and good as far as hospital food goes. And then when my friends ended up visiting, my who I would call my tribe, they were making me meals. They got an Airbnb like right across the street, and they were making me meals and bringing me food. And the love there and the nutrition is such a big part of why I healed the way that I did. Like that
Hmm.
whole component of tribe was critical for me.
Yeah, I mean, community is so important. And I think a lot of people became pretty isolated if they weren't already. But 2020 made a lot of people either afraid of other people or it was beliefs that separated people. And I realized how important it was to have community. And we can't do it alone. And sometimes we want to be independent and it's hard to be vulnerable. It's hard to receive help. Is that something? I mean, you were kind of forced, but typically before this experience, would you say that you were more on the independent side and just receiving all of this help would have been challenging if you weren't forced to be in this position?
Yeah. So I don't know if you've ever done the Enneagram, but I'm a type 2, which is called the helper. So I
Mm.
identify with helping people. I mean, that's the career and purpose that I've chosen in this life, to always help people. And the ironic thing about being the helper is that you don't receive it. So there's some shadow there in being that identity. And I wouldn't say I'm so pressed against receiving help, but I'd say generally I would always find a way myself to do what I need to do, especially when it comes to health. Like I'll figure it out on my own. I'll figure out what's right for me, and so on. But yeah, I mean, when you're forced into a place of I don't have a choice, then what else? What other choice do you have other than to surrender into that? The
Mhm.
only thing that I really could use at a time was my voice and my mind. Like I can be aware enough of the choice that was right for me to be able to communicate that.
Mhm.
And then Ashley would be like my hand. Like, so I knew it was right for me, and then she would help me apply it. And that definitely had to be exercised. I think I mentioned to you, like, there were some nurses and some treatment in there that I was just not going to tolerate. And luckily, my mind was there enough to know what was right for me.
Yeah. If she hadn't been able to be with you, not because she didn't want to, but if she were not allowed to be with you, how do you think that would have been a different experience for you?
If this was COVID for me and they weren't allowed, I wasn't allowed to have people in the hospital, I'd walk my ass straight out of there. There's no fucking way.
Do you think that you could have walked at that point?
I don't know how I would have done it.
Yeah, you wouldn't have been.
When I had the burns, just the burns themselves, I could walk. I
Mhm.
could move my body, but the risk of infection, the ability to clean everything the way that I know that I was
Mhm.
cleaned, which I haven't really talked about at all, that would have been impossible or very
Mhm.
difficult. I'm sure infection would have been a big, big
Mhm.
risk.
So, what do they put on your skin before they have the grafts? Is it moistened saline or something like that, gauze, or what do they cover it with prior to having the graft?
Yeah, so every day, this is the worst part of my day regularly. They came to clean my skin. And if you've ever washed a scab in the shower that's fresh, you know like how horrible that is. So they would legit like come in and they would use hot soapy, unfortunately like dial soap, like hand washing soap, to like scrub my skin. And that was by far like the most challenging thing. I actually had to take fentanyl every time they did that every
Hmm.
day. And it was spread out like sometimes the nurses would be really good and efficient with the time and it would take 30 minutes, but then there would be some in there just lagging ass and take 75 minutes to do the same thing. So I would have to take fentanyl every 15 minutes as they're scrubbing my skin. And, that process kind of changed throughout the time because my skin was changing. But essentially, they would scrub the skin with the hot water and soap, and taking off the gauze that was originally there was always part of the process too, because they used this
Zero form?
zero form. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like that yellow gauze that I think it has some type of Vaseline on it or something, so it doesn't stick.
Oh, but that shit stuck
It's still
anyways.
stuck, yeah. Sometimes it does, but it's less than cotton. But yeah.
To me, yeah.
Okay, so they put that on there.
Yeah, I mean, that was put over my whole body wherever the burns were.
Hmm.
And funny thing was, like, I every time they did it, one of the ways that I noticed that I was progressing is there would be a little bit less zero form put on.
Hmm.
So I knew that I was like making progress because less and less of that was needed. But yeah, taking that off every day was hard. Like it, literally, like scabs and flesh would pull off with it every time they pulled it off, and then the cleaning would happen, and then they would rewrap, my whole body back up, and I was pretty much fully wrapped probably for like 21 days. I
Wow.
was fully wrapped, like my hands, my arms, the way they wrapped my chest, neck, and throat, even my ears. They wrapped up my ears and then my thighs, and then they had my lower leg wrapped because of circulation. My feet were starting to swell, and they kept just bandages down there to keep compression.
So 24 days, I don't know if you're getting up and walking because is that going to hinder the growth or the skin healing the way that it needs to? Or is walking, did they want you walking when you were?
I did walk.
Oh, you did. Okay.
I don't remember when I started walking. I started walking like a couple days in, pretty quickly.
Okay.
But because the front of my body was burned, it made standing upright nearly impossible because my posture was burnt and locked into place in this
Mm.
forward protraction hunch position. I couldn't even lay in a bed flat